The eviction notice was taped to the door of Marisol's apartment at 7 in the morning, which she thought was a particularly cruel hour to destroy someone's life. She stood in the hallway of the building on Dufferin Street in her nursing scrubs, still damp from the overnight shift at St. Joseph's, and read the paper twice. 60 days. The landlord had finally done it. 3 months of partial payments, 1 pleading letter, and now this. She folded the notice into her pocket and went inside to feed her cat because what else do you do? The apartment was small in the way that only Toronto apartments can be small. Efficiently, deliberately, as if the city itself had decided that people like Marisol didn't deserve ceiling height. She had a kitchen that was also a living room, a bedroom separated by a curtain she'd hung herself, and a bathroom where the tap ran cold for the first 90 seconds every morning. She'd lived there for 4 years. She knew every creak of the floorboards. She poured kibble into the bowl for Fenwick, a large opinionated tabby she'd found outside the hospital, and stood at the window while he ate. Below, Dufferin Street was just starting to wake up. A man in a construction vest walking fast. A woman pushing a stroller with one hand, holding coffee with the other. Ordinary Tuesdays, Marisol had 60 days to find somewhere she could afford on a registered practical nurse's salary, which in this city was approximately the same as finding a rent-controlled unicorn. She didn't sleep. She showered, changed, and went back out. The car was in the middle of the intersection at Dufferin and King when she walked past it at 9:15, and it was causing the kind of jam that makes people in Toronto deeply personally offended. It was a black Mercedes Maybach, the kind of car that cost more than most people would make in a decade, and it was completely dead. Hazards on, not moving, with track beginning to spiral outward in all directions. The driver, a large man in a dark suit, was standing beside it, looking at his phone with the expression of someone who had never personally experienced a problem he couldn't pay to disappear, and was finding this moment disorienting. Marisol's had grown up in her uncle's garage in Hamilton. She'd spent every summer of her childhood handing him tools, listening to him explain what was wrong with every engine that came through, taking in the logic of it the way other kids absorbed baseball statistics. She'd tried nursing school partly because it paid, and partly because the diagnostic logic was the same. You find the symptom, trace it back, fix the source. She looked at the car. She looked at the blocked intersection. She looked at the driver, who had now tried calling someone twice with no result. She told herself she was going to walk past. She had things to do. She had 60 days to solve her entire life. She walked up to the car anyway. "Do you want help?" she asked. "I know engines." The driver looked at her. Her scrubs, her hospital lanyard, the coffee she was still holding, and his face went through several stages of disbelief. "You know engines." "My uncle had a garage. I spent a lot of time in it. Can I?" He stepped back, more out of bewilderment than permission, and she handed him her coffee, popped the hood, and spent the next 4 minutes looking at what was actually wrong. The serpentine belt had shredded. It had wrapped itself around the tensioner pulley in a way that made the whole system seize. Not a quick fix, not without parts, but she could see exactly why it had failed. A hairline crack in the idler pulley that had been building for a while. "You need a flatbed," she said, coming back around. "The belt's gone and there's a cracked idler pulley underneath it. If you drive it, you'll crack the engine block. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you now instead of after you try to drive it." He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her. Not the way most men did, assessing, cataloguing, but in the specific way of someone recalculating a situation. Then he made a call. The tow truck was arranged. He called a second car. While they waited, he asked her what she did. "Nurse," she said. "At St. Joseph's, overnight shifts mostly, and the mechanic knowledge is from my childhood. I don't use it much anymore." She paused. The pulley would have gone in the next week anyway, even without this. Someone should have caught it at the last service. He looked at her differently after that. When the second car arrived, another black vehicle, 2 men in suits who got out without expression. He turned back to her. "What's your name?" "Marisol Vega." Elias Deveraux. He offered his hand and she shook it. His grip was the kind that didn't perform strength, which she noted. "I appreciate your help, Miss Vega." "You're welcome," she said, and took her coffee back from him and went to catch her bus. She didn't think about it again until the next morning, when there was a knock at her apartment door and a woman she had never seen before was standing in the hallway holding an envelope. The woman introduced herself as Simone, assistant to Mr. Deveraux, and she delivered the envelope with the kind of professional neutrality that suggested she had delivered many envelopes in her career and harbored no opinions about any of them. Inside was a letter, handwritten in the kind of clear, deliberate script that people learn when they don't want to be misunderstood. "Ms. Vega, you saved me considerable difficulty yesterday, and possibly my engine block. I'd like to repay that in some practical way. If you're ever in need of anything, please don't hesitate to contact me. The number below is mine directly. E. Deveraux." There was a business card clipped to it. No company logo, just his name and a number. Marisol sat on the edge of her bed and looked at it for a while. Fenwick walked across the envelope and sat on the business card, which she took as a sign of something, though she wasn't sure what. She put the card in her drawer and didn't think about it for 2 weeks. Then the hospital called her into a meeting with HR and her unit manager, and she walked out 40 minutes later, knowing that St. Joseph's was restructuring the overnight nursing staff and her position was being eliminated in 6 weeks. They were very sorry. They gave her a pamphlet about the employee assistance program. She sat in the stairwell for 10 minutes before she trusted her legs to work properly. 6 weeks. No job. 60 days on the apartment, now down to 44. She went home, fed Fenwick, and stared at the ceiling for a while. Then she got the business card out of the drawer. She didn't call him for help. That wasn't what she did. She called him because the number was there and she needed to say something out loud to someone who wasn't going to look at her with pity, and she had the irrational idea that Elias Deveraux, whoever he was not the kind of man who did pity. He picked up on the second ring. "Miss Vega," he said, which meant he'd saved her number, which struck her as unexpectedly careful. "I'm sorry to call," she said. "I don't actually want anything. I had a bad day and I don't know why I'm calling you." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, more like he was giving her room. "What happened?" he said. She told him. The eviction notice, the job, the timeline collapsing. She didn't make it sound dramatic because it wasn't, really. It was just the ordinary way things fell apart for people who didn't have a safety net, the slow domino of one thing against another. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Are you home now?" he asked. "Yes. I'll send someone in an hour with dinner. You should eat." "That's not. You helped me," he said. "Let me return the favor. Just dinner. No obligations." She didn't argue, mostly because she hadn't eaten since the previous morning and her body knew it. A man named Barrett arrived with Lebanese food from a place on King West and a brief genuine smile. He didn't stay. He didn't say anything except that Mr. Deveraux hoped she was feeling better, and then he left. Marisol ate on her floor with Fenwick stealing bits of pita and thought about who exactly Elias Deveraux was. She found out 3 days later when she mentioned his name to her friend Claudette, who had worked in wealth management downtown for a decade and knew every significant name in the city the way a cartographer knows coastlines. Claudette looked at her across the table at their regular Thursday coffee and said, "Elias Deveraux. How do you know Elias Deveraux? I helped him with his car." "His car?" Claudette set down her cup. "Marisol. Elias Deveraux runs the Deveraux Group. They own about 1/3 of the commercial real estate in the downtown core, 2 private equity funds, and something in the port logistics sector that nobody talks about in detail." "What does that mean, nobody talks about?" Claudette looked at her with the expression of someone who had been in finance long enough to understand that there were questions you didn't ask and rooms you didn't enter. "It means he's extremely powerful, extremely private, and the kind of man who has layers that don't show up in any public filing." Marisol thought about the envelope, the handwritten letter, the Lebanese food. "He seems fine," she said, which was not a complete sentence but was accurate. "He is fine," Claudette said carefully. "He is also not someone you want to owe anything to, or have owe anything to you, necessarily. I helped him with a serpentine belt." "I know, but men like that, they don't forget things. It's not a personality trait, it's a system." Marisol walked home thinking about that. A system. She had grown up around men with systems. Her uncle had one. Loyalty in, loyalty out, everything accounted for eventually. It hadn't struck her as sinister at the time. It had just struck her as the way some people organized the world. She had one missed call from an unknown number by the time she got home. When she called back, it was Simone, Deveraux's assistant, asking if Marisol might be available for a brief meeting at Mr. Deveraux's office Thursday morning. Marisol said yes before she'd consciously decided to. The Deveraux group occupied the top 3 floors of a tower on Bay Street, and the reception area had the specific quality of silence that money buys. Not quiet, exactly, but a deliberate absence of anything unnecessary. The furniture was understated. The art on the walls was the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Simone met her at the elevator and walked her through to an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake that on a clear October day was almost unreasonably beautiful. Elias Deveraux stood when she came in. She'd remembered him as large and composed. In his own space, he was something more precise than that. He was probably 50, though it was hard to say, the kind of man whose age registered as authority rather than years. Dark hair with grey at the temples. A suit that was not trying to impress anyone. Eyes that, she noticed nows, did not look away when they didn't have to. "Mrs. Vega," he said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation," she said and sat down. He was direct. She appreciated that immediately. He told her that he'd made some inquiries. He said it without apology, as if this were simply how he operated, which she suspected it was, and that he understood she was facing some significant practical difficulties in the short term. "I'm not here to offer charity," he said. "I don't think you'd accept it." "No," she agreed. "I have a position that I believe would suit you if you're open to hearing about it." He paused. "My mother is 73 and lives in Rosedale. She had a cardiac event 8 weeks ago, and her recovery has been complicated by her refusal to take it seriously. She has a medical team. What she doesn't have is someone who will actually be in the house, who understands both the clinical side and the practical side, and who she can't easily intimidate into ignoring her doctor's instructions." Marisol said nothing. "She's intimidated 4 people so far," he added. 2 were registered nurses. 1 was a physiotherapist. "What did she do to them?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. In one case, she convinced the nurse that she knew better than the cardiologist and persuaded her to reduce her medications. In 2 other cases, she simply made the environment untenable. "How?" "She's extremely intelligent and she reads people very quickly. When she identifies a weakness, she uses it. Not out of cruelty, she simply believes that her own judgment is superior to everyone else's, and she marshals evidence toward that conclusion." Marisol thought about that. "What's her name?" she asked. "Marguerite Deveraux." "And you're asking me because you diagnosed a problem in under 5 minutes that 3 mechanics had missed. You told me exactly what I needed to hear without softening it, and when I sent you food, you didn't make it into anything other than what it was." He looked at her directly. "I think you might be someone my mother can't get around." "I might be wrong," Marisol said. "You might be," he agreed, "but I'd like to find out." The salary he named was significantly more than St. Joseph's had been paying. The arrangement included accommodation at the Rosedale house for the duration, which solved several problems at once. She would have her own room, clinical autonomy within the parameters of the existing care plan, and a direct line to the cardiologist, a Dr. Amara Nwosu, who Marisol had actually heard of because she was one of the best in the city. "I need to think about it," Marisol said. "Of course," he said. "Take whatever time you need." She thought about it for about 8 hours, which was how long it took her to go home, argue with herself, call Claudette, argue with Claudette, and conclude that the alternative was 40 days left on an apartment she could no longer afford, and a job search in a hiring environment that had not been kind to her profession lately. She called Simone in the morning and said yes. Marguerite Deveraux was 5 feet tall, 89 pounds of deliberate energy, and she was sitting in the front room of the Rosedale house, reading a biography of a 19th-century Quebecois politician when Marisol arrived, which Marisol thought said everything necessary about her. She looked up over her reading glasses and took Marisol in from shoes to hairline in approximately 4 seconds. "You're the one Elias found," she said, not unkindly, factually. Marisol said, "I'll be here to sell Vega, Mariscovery. I don't require recovery. I require everyone to stop treating me like I'm made of tissue paper." "You had a myocardial infarction 8 weeks ago," Marisol said. "The tissue paper concern is medically reasonable." Marguerite looked at her for a moment. "Sit down," she said, and moved her book slightly to indicate the chair across from her. They talked for 2 hours. Marguerite was not interested in being managed. She was interested, Marisol realized, in being understood, in having someone in the room who could engage with her actual reasoning rather than deflecting it with protocol. When Marisol pushed back on her position about her beta blockers, she did it with the specific pharmacological reasoning, not just because the doctor says so. And Marguerite went quiet in a way that suggested she was actually listening. By the end of the afternoon, Marguerite had not capitulated on anything, but she had stopped testing the edges of the conversation. That night, after Marguerite had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Marisol sat in the kitchen, a large, beautiful kitchen with a window that looked out onto a dark autumn garden, and realized that something in her chest had unclenched for the first time in months. She texted her uncle in Hamilton, working a new job. "Private nursing. I think it might be okay." He texted back. "You always land on your feet, Mija. It's the Garcia thing." She smiled at that and went to bed. The first 3 weeks were careful. Marisol learned Marguerite's rhythms. When she was tired but wouldn't admit it, when her ankles were swelling, which were the warning signs she tried to hide, and which were genuine fine days. She coordinated with Dr. Nwosu on adjustments to the care plan and implemented them without making them feel like impositions. She learned that Marguerite played piano badly and loved it, that she had opinions about every piece of legislation that had passed in Ontario in the last 40 years, that she had been estranged from her son for 6 years before the cardiac event had brought them back into cautious proximity. Elias came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He ate dinner with his mother, which Marguerite pretended she had no particular feelings about, and Marisol could see she cared about enormously. He was always composed in the way she remembered, contained, attentive, nothing wasted. He asked Marisol about his mother's progress with the directness she'd come to expect from him, and she answered in kind. He never asked about Marisol, which meant she noticed, more than she otherwise would have, the one Thursday when he asked if she'd had a chance to settle in properly. "Yes," she said. "It's a good house." "My mother likes you," he said. "She tolerates me," Marisol said, "which I think is more significant." He smiled then, fully, and it rearranged his face in a way that caught her off guard. The problem arrived in the form of a man named Aldous Graves, who appeared at the front door on a grey November afternoon, while Elias was away in Vancouver, and Marguerite was at her cardiology appointment with the usual driver. Marisol answered the door because she was there. Graves was perhaps 60, expensively dressed in a way that read as performance rather than habit, and he had the particular smoothness of a man who had spent a long time getting what he wanted by being pleasant about it. "I'm a business associate of Elias's," he said. "Old family friend. I was hoping to drop something off for Marguerite." "She's out," Marisol said. "I can take a message." Of course. He handed her an envelope, heavy, cream-colored, and then didn't leave. He looked past her into the house with an interest that didn't read as social. "And you're a housekeeper?" he asked. "Nursing care," she said. "Ah," he smiled. "How long have you been with the family?" "That's personal information," Marisol said pleasantly. He looked at her with the slight recalibration of a man who had expected easier. "Of course. Well, please make sure Marguerite gets that." He turned to go, then paused. Interesting ring Marguerite wears, the sapphire one. Has she still got that? Marisol looked at him for a moment. I'll make sure she gets the envelope, she said, and closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment after, thinking about it. Then she took out her phone and sent a message to Barrett, who she'd kept the number of because he'd seemed like the kind of person it was useful to know. Someone named Aldous Graves came to the house, said he's a business associate, asked specifically about Marguerite's sapphire ring. I thought you should know. The response came in under 3 minutes. Don't let him in again, I'll tell Mr. Deveraux. 20 minutes later, Elias called. Tell me exactly what he said when she picked up. No greeting, she told him. Every word, as precise as she remembered it. She'd learned from nursing that the exact wording of what a patient said mattered. That paraphrase lost information. When she finished, Elias was quiet for a moment. You closed the door on him, he said. Yes, good. Another pause. Are you and my mother safe right now? She's not back yet. I'm in the house alone. Barrett will be there in 12 minutes, he said. Don't open the door to anyone else. Okay, she said. And then, because she was herself, what's in the ring? He didn't answer immediately. Elias. It belonged to my grandmother, he said finally. It's valuable, but not in the way Graves is probably thinking. A pause. There's a document inside the setting. A very old one. My grandmother was the kind of woman who knew that the safest place to keep something important was somewhere unexpected. Marisol absorbed that. Okay, she said. I'll make sure she keeps it in the house safe when she's not wearing it. You have access to the house safe. Your mother showed me when she decided I was trustworthy. Week 2, I think. Another of those pauses that she'd started to read as him recalibrating. Miss Vega, he said, and she could hear something in his voice that hadn't been there in the early weeks. I'll make sure she's home safe, Marisol said. Focus on what you need to do in Vancouver. Barrett arrived in 11 minutes. Marguerite returned 20 minutes after that and was furious in a compact, specific way about Aldous Graves, whom she described as a man who had spent 40 years circling the perimeter of her family, looking for gaps in the fence. He worked with my husband in the 80s, she said. He was never invited in. He was always adjacent. What does he want? Marisol asked. Marguerite touched the ring on her right hand, sapphire set in old white gold, and said nothing for a moment. My husband made certain arrangements before he died. Graves has been trying to undo them for 20 years. The ring is part of that. She looked at Marisol directly. You called Barrett. Yes. Marguerite nodded once, the way she nodded when something confirmed a conclusion she'd already reached. Good girl, she said, which from Marguerite was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Elias came back from Vancouver 2 days early. He arrived Thursday afternoon and went straight to his mother, then came to find Marisol in the kitchen, where she was making notes for the weekend medication schedule. He sat down across from her without being asked, which was new. Tell me the rest, he said. The rest? You told me the conversation with Graves. I want to know what you thought, what you noticed. She put down her pen. He wasn't there for social reasons. The envelope was a pretext. He wanted to confirm the ring was still in the house and get a read on the staff situation, how long we'd been there, what our loyalty level was. She paused. He was assessing whether there was a gap. And is there one? She looked at him steadily. No. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at the table, briefly, and back up. I need to tell you something, he said. All right. The work my father did, it was legitimate. He built the Deveraux Group from nothing. But the world he operated in was not always clean, and some of those associations didn't end when he died. Graves is one of them. What's in the ring is a signed agreement that protects the family's interest in the original company structure. It can't be contested without the original document, and Graves has spent 2 decades trying to get his hands on it to have it destroyed. Marisol considered this. And your mother's been wearing it this whole time. She's been wearing it this whole time, he said, because she knows exactly what she's doing. She really is remarkable, Marisol said, and meant it. He smiled, not the contained professional one, but the other one. the one that came from somewhere less managed. She is. Why are you telling me this? Because you already know most of it, he said, and because you need to understand the situation fully to stay safe. He paused. And because I trust you. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the garden was dark and bare, and November, which should have been bleak, but wasn't. I don't know very much about your world, she said. I know, he said. That's actually one of the things. He stopped. One of the things, she said. He looked at her the way he had, once in the intersection on a Tuesday morning, when a woman in nursing scrubs had correctly identified a mechanical problem. 3 mechanics had missed, like he was recalculating. My mother told me to stop being professionally careful with you, he said. When this afternoon? She was quite specific about it. Marisol thought about Marguerite in the front room with her biography and her sapphire ring and her absolute certainty about how things should be. What did she say, specifically? She said, and I'm quoting directly. Elias, the girl fixed your car, face down Aldous Graves, and keeps me alive and annoyed in equal measure. If you keep treating her like an employee at this point, it's because you've decided to be a coward, and no son of mine is a coward. Marisol looked at the table. She pressed her lips together very hard. She's really something, she managed. She is, Elias agreed. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression that was, for the first time, entirely unguarded. No management, no professional distance, just a man in a kitchen in Rosedale on a November evening who had run out of excuses to be careful. I live here, she said. Technically, as an employee, I know. We could figure that out. Your mother is my patient. She's improving significantly. Dr. Nwosu said last week she might not need full-time care much longer. He paused. Though she's also told my mother she's going to find a reason to keep you around. Marguerite said that. Dr. Nwosu said it. My mother agreed, which is the first time in recorded history she has agreed with a member of her medical team. Marisol sat with that for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the garden. Fenwick, she'd brought him 2 weeks in after Marguerite had specifically asked to meet the cat, was somewhere upstairs, probably on Marguerite's bed, which Marguerite insisted she didn't enjoy. One thing at a time, she said. We deal with Graves first. Agreed, he said. And then, thank you for staying. You haven't seen me leave, she said. Graves came back 10 days later, and this time he didn't come to the door. He sent 2 men at 3 in the morning who cut the power to the exterior cameras on the east side of the house. What they didn't know was that Marisol, who had come from a world where you checked the locks twice and trusted your instincts, had noticed a car parked on the street outside for the 3rd consecutive night and had mentioned it to Barrett at 9 o'clock the previous evening. Barrett had mentioned it to Elias. Elias had made calls. When the 2 men reached the side door, they found Barrett and 3 other men already there, and the situation resolved without further complications. The police were called because Elias Deveraux was the kind of man who, in this city, in this decade, understood that legal recourse was more effective than the alternative. Graves was arrested at his home in Forest Hill at 5 in the morning. The charges were enough to occupy him for a significant amount of time, and the agreement in the ring. Photographed, notarized copies lodged now with 3 separate lawyers, was no longer dependent on a single piece of jewelry that a 73-year-old woman wore because she was not afraid of anything. Marisol was in the kitchen when Elias came back in at 6 in the morning, cold and tired, and carrying 2 takeout coffees from somewhere that must have been open at that hour. He put one in front of her. It's done, he said. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Your mother slept through it. I know. She's going to be annoyed about that. Furious, Marisol agreed. She's going to feel like she missed something. He sat down across from her again in what she had started to think of as his chair at this table. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the specific exhaustion that comes after of holding something steady, finally releasing its tension. Are you all right? She asked. Yes. He looked at her. Are you? I'm fine. I've worked overnight shifts in an ER. She paused. This was actually quieter. He laughed. A real one, brief and genuine, the sound of it unexpected in the early morning kitchen. She found she's wanted to hear it again. "Marisol," he said. "Elias," she said back. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, briefly, carefully, the way he did everything, with full awareness of what he was doing and no performance around it. "One thing at a time," he said. "That was my line." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I'm applying it myself now." Outside the window, the garden was beginning to show the very first grey of morning, that particular Toronto winter dawn that is more resignation than light, and it was, she thought, one of the better mornings she could remember in a long time. She had come to this city for work. She had stayed because there was nowhere else to go. She had helped a man in an intersection with a broken car because she couldn't help it, because the problem was there and she knew the answer, because that was simply who she was. She had not expected it to lead here. But she had also stopped being surprised, at some point in the last few months, by what following her own instincts turned out to build. Fenwick appeared in the doorway, regarded Elias with the thoughtful suspicion he reserved for people he had not yet fully decided about, and then jumped onto the chair beside Marisol and sat down with the air of someone who had made a decision. Elias looked at the cat. "I think that's an endorsement. It might be a trial period," Marisol said. "I can work with a trial period," he said. And she believed him.